Hey, everybody. Welcome to Change Starts Here, our research conversation episode. Now, I am here with my colleagues, Dr. Eve Miller and Dr. Jen Chevalier. And can you guys believe this? This is the last episode of our
Wow.
season.
I know.
I don't know. Where does time go? So, anyways, we have been talking about developing the competencies essential for strengthening students' executive functions all throughout this season for the sole purpose, for the purpose of the ways in which those competencies support academic success. So, to kick us off, Eve, can you remind our audience what executive functions are?
Yes. Well, we narrowed in on the kind of foundational three skills that underlie a lot, which is working memory, inhibition, and flexibility, adaptability. There are these complex skills that allow us to do higher order work and to achieve goals is kind of the overview of what executive functioning is.
So for us this season, this has meant that we have talked about things ranging from adaptability to critical thinking to planning ahead. Essentially, a lot of important skills students need to be successful in school and beyond.
And as a former educator, a parent, and honestly, as just a human being, these topics have really resonated with me. And, as I've been thinking back through the season, it got me wondering if there's been any one particular idea that we've talked about this season that's really stood out to either one of you. Like if you were going to say, what has been your biggest takeaway of the season, what would you say it is?
What stands out to me most is how critical it is for all of us to be adaptable. Things are changing so quickly in all areas. It's like a season of rapid fire change. And I feel like unless we can face change with curiosity and an open mind, research shows that what we'll do instead is like dig in our heels and stick with the status quo. And honestly, I feel like anyone who does that like does what they always do instead of adapting, they're going to be left behind as everyone else reinvents themselves or their skill set, or even like develops new strategies and innovates and moves to the next level.
So it's so interesting that you bring that up because since we aired that episode or recorded that episode, I have continued to do reading and I've come upon some really compelling statistics about employers hiring new graduates and them identifying adaptability as like a key ingredient in a new hire because for the kind of like the very reason that you're talking about, Jen, is that it's just a rapidly changing world, which means that you've got to change with the way things are evolving. I'm glad that you reminded me of that one.
And the emotions behind the need to change, right? Like, I think that's kind of an interesting piece of it too. Like, it's hard to change. It's hard to adjust to those changes. So that I agree. I think that's a great one that stayed on my mind too. Yeah. The episode that has stuck with me the most goes all the way back to episode 3 on self-awareness. In this episode, leading into it, we had come across a paper that, and I think Jennifer, you shared it, that 95% of respondents in this study by Harvard psychologist Tasha Urich, they said that they had a high level of self-awareness. And then based on these pretty rigorous tests that her lab had developed, only about 15% of them actually did have a high level of self-awareness. And some of my earliest research experiences were being in a multitasker lab where like everyone thinks they're really good at multitasking, but very, very, very few of us are. So it kind of raised my alert to, there are costs to multitasking and there are costs to thinking that you're more self-aware than you are. And I started to become aware of the spaces that I kind of tuned out ways to grow my awareness, my self-awareness. And I became aware of these big blind spots in my life where I don't receive feedback, where I don't just reflect enough, like we talked about in that episode. I don't reflect enough on my performance there, on my interactions with others there. And that has just been on my mind daily since the podcast. So that has really shifted how I think and some of the goals that I've set for myself, since it is such a critical, foundational kind of competency that's so multifaceted.
You make me think, like, am I in that 80% that says I'm super self-aware, but I'm actually not? And is there a way, I wonder if there's a way for us to really gauge that more accurately, so that we can be real with ourselves. I just certainly don't want to go walking around like misleading myself about my abilities in any certain area. So that's interesting.
But I think even that alone, you having that question of how can I be more aware? Where are those opportunities that I might not be, I could grow my awareness in different ways. I think that alone helps us ask the questions that open up our awareness and help us to get the feedback that we need in various ways.
Yeah, I was going to say a similar thing, to say that question is sort of like a tripwire, right? Am I being self-aware? And I have had moments, and because that one was months ago, but I have had moments where I'm like asking myself that question, and basically kind of labeling them like that was very self-aware, or maybe that was a little unself-aware, lacking self-awareness there. But even noticing where we're lacking self-awareness is increased awareness.
That's true. You make me think of a time that happened recently where I was in a conversation with my husband and another person. The three of us were talking, and I could see another person walk over in like my peripheral vision, and she was waiting to speak to me. And I didn't want to keep her waiting, and it seemed like the two of them were talking for a second. So without being self-aware, I just exited the conversation and went and talked to her. And then I came back over and I could like feel the vibe was like, ooh. And then after, my husband was like, that was so rude. That other person had just turned and started talking to you. And you didn't say anything. You just walked away and started talking to someone else. And I was like, oh, that's so obnoxious. I can't believe I just did that. So it was super helpful for him to say that, because I might not have ever really been fully aware of what I had done. So I could apologize and not do it again.
And that was a big piece of that episode, is what others can do to help heighten our awareness. Is that I think we have, it does a service to each other, when we're gentle with each other, and can, be a mirror that we need to become more self-aware.
How about you, Kim?
So takeaways from this season. So one of, I think, the things that has really kind of spurred my thinking ever since we talked about it is the connection between goal setting and hope. So that idea that thinking about the future is kind of our default mode of thinking. And the more that we envision the things that we want to achieve, so basically our goals, the more hope we have. And so for me, if there's one thing that I want for students in school, for my own children, I want them to be hopeful, right? I find I have, in my own personal experiences, I feel like when hope seems low, that's when things seem worst, right? That's when we're experiencing the most personal problems, or not making the growth that we want in our job or in school, as I've watched my own children grow. And I just find hope to be very motivating. When I know that when I'm hopeful, that's when I'm most eager to get up in the morning. That's when I feel happiest about what I'm doing. And so if I could bring something to the world, I would want there to be more hope. And goal setting feels like such an easy way to do that to me. Like, I'm like, all right, so we just start envisioning what we want and picturing what that could look like, and thinking, making what Shane Lopez calls these future memories. And I just think that is a really cool idea. Yeah, so that's kind of what's been sitting with me.
I connect that to the other competencies that we've been talking about, because with Hope Theory, there is the goal setting, and it's also knowing that you can reach it, right? That kind of like seeing the pathway to reach that goal. So it's not a fantasy, it's not a daydream, it is a real tangible goal. And for students who, in the latest research, the levels of hopelessness are, higher than like understandably, right? And so what do they need? They do need those goals that they can look forward to, but also the goals that they know they have it within them to achieve. And I feel like the skills that those competencies that we've talked about this season, those go a long way in helping a student to feel like not only do I have a goal, but I have the skills I need. I see the path, and then another path if that one gets blocked, to help me get there. That is hope. That is hope. And I think a lot of adults need that right now, and a lot of students do as well.
That was such a good reminder, Kim, because I had forgotten that connection. And sometimes when I hear someone talking about like setting a goal, I'm like, oh boy, here we go again. But if we can frame it that way as like a path to success and a hopeful pathway and, a pathway for growth and those types of things, it just feels very different than just setting a goal and trying to achieve it. And that speaks to what you said, Eve, with like having a plan. So you actually can achieve it instead of just like there's some obscure target out there and maybe you might get to it somehow.
And I will mention that hope is a stronger predictor of academic achievement than like SAT scores and things like that. Like, so what we are talking about can feel very fluffy, but hope is it's a cognitive skill, and it is a really profound one, because I've got to bring in the brain every episode, but like it does connect to those motivation centers within us. So that feeling happy is really tied to the parts of us that are like, I have the energy, I have the drive to learn this. I have a reason for learning this, right? So ownership in that is so important.
And there's nothing fluffy about that, because motivation is one of those challenges that teachers often say that they are contending with. They talk about how apathetic students are, and how disengaged they are. And if we just give them a reason to get up in the morning and, help them to see how they're going to get there. I mean, like I said, there's nothing more that I want for students. There's nothing more I want for my children. There's nothing more that I want for myself. There's nothing more that I want for everybody. So,
Yeah.
All right. Any last thoughts before we part ways on this conversation today?
You just made me start Googling. I'm going to not say this right. So when you fact check me, this is wrong, and we'll put the actual link to the correct information. So I'll just talk in broad sweeps here. But I remember reading this story about it. This is awful, but this guy was testing rats to see how long they could swim before they would drown. And it wasn't long. It was like 90 seconds to 2 minutes or something that they would start to sink and he'd pull them out. But because he pulled them out, the next time he put them in water, they had developed this hope that something was going to come and rescue them. And they could swim in the water exponentially longer, like 1,000 times longer, because they believed that there was hope that they would get pulled out again and rescued. And that has always stuck with me. Sometimes when I feel like I'm drowning under something, I'm like, wait, like there's hope here. What is the hopeful thing? And then I'll cling on to that and move forward. So I will put the accurate information in the show notes for that.
Awesome. Well, my big takeaway then is that, academics is a big piece of it, once again, but holistically thinking about students. Just these takeaways today remind me of how important those executive functions are, those competencies are, leadership competencies are in helping students to truly experience what success can be for them. So I want to say thank you to all of our listeners. It has been a pleasure being with you this season. We will be back at the end of the summer with our next season. And so it's so important in order to know when that next episode breaks, to like and subscribe. And so, thank you to everybody.
Thank you. Thank you, ladies. It's been a pleasure.